I have finished cutting off the excess. I've cut out the sides here because I wanted those to remain open on my design. And I have left the back plate here in the middle because I want it to look like that. Now I begin the process of forming this into a ring. So now it is 12 gauge metal, which is why we used the 12 gauge metal measurement. So this is gonna be just like the other times we've formed rings. You're gonna have a vise, a mandrel, and a piece of leather to help protect the mandrel. Now this is our beat up mandrel. You see it's got all these marks in it from going in the vise, but we still want to protect it with a piece of leather. You open the vise, which has little claws in it for holding on to things such as this, and you put it in, tighten it up. And then I have my rawhide mallet. Again, I want rawhide because it's not gonna stretch my material or make marks in it. And then I'm using the weighted one. The weighted ones have dark green bottoms and they're very heavy. Silver is going to get harder faster than copper does. So the weighted mallet really comes in handy. And you might have to anneal it a couple of times during this process, and that's okay. Anytime it gets really hard, just go anneal it. So, let's see. My ring's kind of larger, so I'm going to be working on this end. So I'm actually going to loosen this just a little bit and scoot this out some so I've got more room to work. If your ring is smaller, you would be more toward the smaller end. So I'll put it here and try to do what I can with my hands. And then, just as before, I'm going to attempt to make it into that horseshoe shape. And we're going to have to contend with the twisting just like we did on our containers. And the silver is a lot harder to hold on to than the copper, in my experience. So, kind of got a loose U going on. All right, and keep going here. It is twisting a bit, so I'm going to do what I did before and hammer on the opposite end. Just to help undo some of that twisting. Okay. I'm going to move down here to the stump now. Just as we did when we made our very first rings, and just as we did with our container, I'm going to now aim right here and right here to bring these tops together. And I want to be very conscious of how much it's bending right here because it's going to want to crack right here. So I'm not going to go too quickly or be too rough. I'm going to be very conscious of how that bend is looking because I don't want to crack it. So I just keep side to side here, and again, I'm not hitting right here. I'm hitting right there, maybe like right in this area here. So I've got one overlap, click. Another overlap, click, that's building that tension. You gotta have the clicks. Click. And try and straighten out that twist just a little bit. I'm almost there. So if you look at it from the side, because this metal is so thick, it really helps illustrate the concept of why we want it to be flat. You can see that the bottoms are touching, but the tops are not. It's making a V shape. Can you see that V shape there? So I need to keep going until both sides, the top and the bottom, are touching each other. You can see now that they're touching all the way through. If I keep going and go too far, then the tops will be touching and the bottoms won't. I don't want that. And I've been able to correct all the twisting. So I hold it up to the light. I held it up to the light. I don't see any light going through there, which is a great thing. If there was, I would take my saw and I would very gently saw through it. In fact, let me show you, even though I don't really need it. It's only gonna help. All right, so what I'm gonna do is take my saw frame. I just have like a 1 or a 0 saw blade. I'm gonna thread it through my ring and load it up, just as if I was gonna do a piercing. Okay, then I hold it away from me towards you. Here's the important part. So I line it up with the seam and I start sawing. But here's the thing. Do not press on this at all. You're using the saw kind of as a file. You're using the saw to remove any material that's causing your seam to not sit straight. If you use pressure, you're just gonna push it through instead of actually cutting material out of the way. So no pressure at all. I'm like barely holding on to this saw frame. I'm accepting the fact that it's gonna take a minute, and I'm just going very, very slowly. No pressure at all. And then I can hear, oh, there it went. You can hear as you're getting close to the bottom, the tone changes, and you just make sure you don't press on it. And then, if you've got enough tension on it, it should come like perfectly snap right together. See that? So now I have a perfect seam ready to solder. Okay, so I'm going to flux the seam, top and bottom. Because this is silver and I am trying to prevent the fire stain, I am gonna go ahead and cover the whole thing. It doesn't hurt anything, so why not? And then, because this is the second joint on this piece of metal, I'm going to use the medium solder, which is going to flow at a lower temperature than the solder I already have on here. I place the chips. I probably really only need that one, but I'm gonna put another just as an insurance policy. And put them in line with the seam. Okay. I'm going to use a relatively large torch. I think this is a 2. You could get away with a 1, but you want to make sure you have plenty of heat. You don't want to skimp on the heat, because when you do that, when you don't use enough heat, you end up burning off your flux before your solder flows. So, to tell you before I start, this is just like any other ring we've made. I'm going to preheat. When the flux is toothpastey, I'm going to go across, but it's very important that I also tilt it and point it underneath the seam. I need to try to get heat under that seam to draw the solder through. And then when it's glassy, I just come and go right over the seam. But remember, if I get one side hotter than the other, the solder is going to go to one side and not in my seam. So it's very important to stay straight up and down and go back and forth evenly across the seam. Let's do it. Keep the underside of that as much as possible. Straight over the top. There it goes. So once it's flowing, I am going to shoot it underneath just to make sure it went all the way. Turn the torch off. Let it cool for a little bit before you quench it. When you quench the silver, you should hear a light hiss, like a psst. You should not hear a ka-ch. That's being too mean to it. Silver's fragile. And you can see right here in the solder seam that it went all the way through. So that's good news. I'm just gonna hold it up off this brick for a moment. Pickle it, clean it. As long as the seam is actually soldered closed, we'll form it into a ring. It's soldered all the way. See, the solder seam's full there. It's full here. If we solder it correctly, once we file it, you won't be able to tell where the seam is. So now I am going to form it into a ring. Now, even though the silver is now annealed, it's going to be much harder than the copper ever was. So I'm still going to be using the weighted hammer. And it's going to take a fair amount of hitting. I apologize in advance if the camera is being jostled around. And then taking it off and analyzing it. So you can see that it's still kind of pointing out right here. So I want to make sure that I get that part taken care of. As we file this to clean up the inside, it is going to get a little bit bigger. Here we go. Perfectly round. Ooh, she's pretty. Oh.